The ancient world was often a realm of grand pronouncements and epic battles, yet sometimes the most profound moments unfolded in hushed tones, shaping civilizations not with thunderous drama, but with the gentle whisper of time itself. These are the tales of old Greece, moments that reveal the quiet human experiences woven into the very fabric of their world. The Hellenic people possessed a remarkable ability to uncover profound meaning in the most unassuming instances, a divine being bestowing a gift upon a burgeoning polis, a craftsman meticulously shaping clay as the sun dips below the horizon, a child engrossed in play with a simple toy that held the potential to safeguard lives in the future. These narratives diverge from the expected sagas of heroic exploits, instead illuminating the intimate, relatable human episodes that imbued their existence with authenticity. It remains a fascinating spectacle to observe individuals from across the globe converging to partake in these serene, time-honored stories. Now, as the ambient light dims and perhaps the soft, rhythmic hum of a fan fills the air, an immersive journey begins. It transports one to an era when deities walked among mortals, yet even these powerful beings occasionally favored tranquil contemplation over ostentatious displays of might. Consider how the most pivotal triumphs sometimes emerge not from the clash of weaponry or the fury of storms, but from a single, perfectly conceived notion. Such was precisely the scenario that unfolded on a sacred hilltop in ancient Greece, where two formidable gods vied, not for material riches or widespread acclaim, but for the distinguished honor of naming a city that, at that juncture, existed only in potential. Envision, if you will, the dawn breaking over that rugged elevation, destined one day to cradle the magnificent Parthenon. For now, it was merely an expanse of limestone and wild herbs, swaying gently in the caress of the Mediterranean breeze. The nascent inhabitants of this unnamed settlement had convened, their unassuming wool garments fluttering softly in the wind. Their presence was not for mere amusement. They had assembled to deliberate upon what might well be the most momentous decision their nascent community would ever confront. Poseidon, the formidable ruler of the seas, made his entrance first, as deities of the ocean often do, exuding the self-assured confidence of one who commands every drop of water from the immediate coast to the furthest horizon. One could almost discern the subtle crunch of his sandals upon the parched earth, a sound starkly contrasting with his accustomed domain of frothing waves and salty spray. His majestic beard carried the subtle aroma of the ocean's depths, and with each movement, one might perceive the faint, distant echo of waves gently caressing distant shores. Yet Poseidon did not hasten. This characteristic deliberate pace was intrinsic to ancient divine contests. They unfolded with the measured rhythm of changing seasons, far removed from the frenetic urgency of modern competitions. He meticulously surveyed the hill, his fingers tracing the contours of the soil, perhaps even sampling the morning air to gauge their proximity to his cherished sea. The populace waited with a patience that bordered on artistry. In ancient Greece, the act of waiting was refined to an exquisite form. No one consults sundials with impatience or drums their fingers in frustration. They simply existed within the present moment, observing the lazy drift of clouds overhead, listening to the faint, distant bleating of goats on neighboring hills, and feeling the comforting warmth of sun-baked stone beneath their bare feet. When Athena made her appearance, she did not herald her arrival with a flourish of trumpets or a grand spectacle. She simply manifested much like profound wisdom sometimes descends upon an individual quietly, unexpectedly. Her discerning gray eyes swept across the assembled multitude, conveying the distinct impression that she already perceived not only their present identities, but also the future generations they would eventually become. The tenets of the competition were elegantly straightforward, embodying the simplicity often found in the most brilliant concepts. Each deity would present a gift to the people. The people, in turn, would evaluate and select the offering that best served their collective needs. The victor would earn the privilege of naming the city and assuming its role as patron deity. There were no dramatic lightning bolts, no earth-shattering tremors, no epic clashes. Merely two distinct gifts and a pivotal choice. Poseidon initiated the proceedings. He elevated his formidable trident, and for a fleeting moment, the very atmosphere seemed to suspend its breath. Then, with a motion as fluid and graceful as shifting tide pools, he struck the unyielding rocky ground. The earth responded with a tremor, not violent, but rather a deep, resonant rumble, signifying a profound occurrence. Water surged forth, not merely any water, but a true spring, bubbling vigorously from the deep recesses of the earth with the effervescent enthusiasm of nascent life. The people collectively drew a soft gasp, akin to the quiet astonishment one experiences upon witnessing the first star emerge in the twilight sky. Water, especially in the arid Mediterranean climate where summers can transform the landscape into a golden, parched expanse, signifies life itself. However, a solitary individual knelt and cautiously tasted the water. Their countenance subtly altered, not with overt drama, but with the nuanced disappointment of expectations not entirely fulfilled. The water was saline. Beautiful, undeniably. Potent, absolutely. Yet, in a world where fresh water was a precious commodity, salt water presented more of a fundamental problem than an anticipated solution. A hushed murmur rippled through the gathered throng. Within these soft exclamations, one could discern the collective effort of individuals striving to express politeness regarding a gift that, while impressive, lacked true practicality. Their thoughts revolved around their daily necessities, preparing meals, cleansing, hydrating, and tending to their modest gardens. Salt water served the needs of maritime vessels and aquatic life, but what utility did it hold for the potter who required pristine water for his clay? Now it was Athena's turn. She neither brandished a weapon nor invoked dramatic celestial forces. Instead, she knelt. This seemingly simple action conveyed a profound insight into her inherent character. Deities typically did not assume such a humble posture, yet Athena understood that at times, the most potent gesture is the one imbued with the greatest humility. She gently placed her hand upon the dry earth and closed her eyes. For an extended moment, nothing visibly transpired. The people waited, perhaps wondering if they had overlooked some crucial event. But then, almost imperceptibly, a minuscule green shoot pierced through the soil beneath her palm. It ascended with a gradual grace, characteristic of all enduring creations. First, a slender stem, no thicker than a child's finger, then delicate silver-green leaves unfurled, catching the nascent morning light. The people leaned forward, not with boisterous excitement, but with the quiet, profound fascination one experiences when witnessing something truly novel coming into existence. As the plant continued its steady ascent, a process spanning many deliberate minutes, not the instantaneous magic of cinematic depiction. Its inherent nature became unmistakably clear. It was an olive tree, the very first olive tree anyone in this particular locale had ever beheld. The trunk gradually thickened, much like the slow, steady accumulation of wisdom over the passage of years. Branches extended with intentional patience, and then, in a moment that felt more like a gentle, bestowed gift than a miraculous intervention, small green fruits began to appear among the verdant leaves. Someone tentatively extended a hand and plucked one of the olives. They bit into it with caution, for this was a fruit entirely unknown to them. The flavor proved complex, subtly bitter, yet rich with tantalizing possibilities. Another individual took an olive and discovered that when crushed, it yielded a golden oil that clung to their fingers with a tangible weight, suggesting its inherent value. And it is precisely at this juncture that Athena's profound ingenuity truly manifested. She did not merely present them with a tree, she bestowed upon them a deep, intuitive understanding. Without uttering a single word, the people somehow began to grasp the true significance of what they held. This was not simply sustenance, though the olives were certainly edible. This was not merely a tree, though its timber was robust and its shade inviting. This was potential, boundless and transformative. The invaluable oil could ignite lamps, dispelling the encroaching darkness of prolonged winter nights. It could preserve foodstuffs, extending the bounty of summer through leaner months. It possessed the power to mend wounds, to soften skin, to condition leather. The resilient wood could be fashioned into ships, crafted into essential tools, and utilized to construct sturdy homes. Even the leaves held their own utility, as medicine, as sustenance for livestock, and as potent symbols of peace and triumph. But perhaps most crucially, this remarkable tree possessed the capacity for reproduction. One tree would multiply into many, giving rise to sprawling olive groves, thus becoming a foundational cornerstone of an entire civilization. The people were not merely receiving a gift, they were inheriting a future. The ensuing choice, when it finally arrived, was made in quiet contemplation. There was no theatrical announcement, no boisterous acclamations from the crowd. The people simply turned, almost in unison, towards Athena. In their expressions, one could discern not merely a preference, but a deep, resonant understanding. Poseidon's gift had been powerful and immediate. Athena's gift was both eminently practical and enduringly eternal. Poseidon, accepting defeat with a grace befitting powerful beings who must occasionally learn such humility, offered a nod and returned to his aquatic domain. The salt spring persisted. It would become a hallowed site, a perpetual reminder that even in the deliberate selection of wisdom over raw power, power itself is neither forgotten nor dismissed. But the burgeoning city now belonged to Athena. Athens, they would name it, in honor of their sagacious patron goddess. And millennia hence, when one savors the rich taste of olive oil on warm, crusty bread, or beholds an olive branch as an emblematic representation of peace, one is experiencing and witnessing the enduring echo of that serene morning when profound wisdom proved immeasurably more valuable than mere spectacle. The olive tree grew with deliberate slowness on that inaugural day, its roots delving deep into the unyielding rocky soil, and in its patient, steadfast growth, one might perhaps discern a reflection of Athens itself. Not the Athens celebrated in dramatic myths, but the Athens of everyday existence, where diligent potters shaped clay, where curious children learned their letters, where ordinary people discovered that sometimes the most profound victories are secured, not by wielding force, but by discerning precisely which seed to plant. That pivotal olive tree from the preceding narrative did not merely bestow a city with its enduring name. It simultaneously planted the seminal seed of an idea that would ultimately reconfigure the very way humanity conceptualizes thought itself. However, let us now deliberately slow our pace and endeavor to imagine the unfolding events in the days immediately following that quiet, momentous competition on the sacred hill. On the morning subsequent to Athena's triumph, one would have encountered the early Athenians engaged in a truly remarkable activity. They were not engaged in heated arguments or declarative pronouncements, but rather in a profound, collective discussion, carefully articulating what this momentous choice signified for their burgeoning community. Picture small clusters of individuals gathered reverently around the newly planted olive tree, their voices hushed in the crisp morning air, their hands perhaps unconsciously extending to touch the nascent bark as they conversed. Here, the true genesis of our narrative unfolds, for the act of selecting a designation transcended the mere assignment of a label to their nascent community. In the ancient epoch, nomenclature inherently conveyed potent forces, identity, authority, and, most profoundly, deliberate intent. To consecrate a place with the appellation of a deity was to articulate a solemn pledge concerning the very essence and aspiration of the domain one sought to forge. A seasoned agriculturist, his hands perpetually ingrained with the fertile soil, might have been the first to articulate his conviction. Athena bestowed upon us a bounty of enduring utility, he would have declared, gently caressing a ripe olive between his gnarled digits. A gift not ephemeral, but one destined to nourish our progeny and their descendants for generations hence. His utterance would have resonated with the pragmatic discernment of an individual who comprehended that ostentatious offerings often diminish with time, whereas truly beneficial provisions accrue value over the long sweep of history. A youthful matriarch, her infant slumbering serenely in her embrace, could have offered a silent affirmation. Her contemplations would have revolved around the precious olive oil, destined to safely illuminate their dwellings through the protracted winter nights, and the provisions that would preserve sufficiently to sustain her child through periods of scarcity. When we pronounce the name Athens, she might have softly uttered, we are declaring our collective commitment to foresight and prudent planning. And it was precisely in this juncture, this tranquil, unassuming interchange among individuals, that an extraordinary transformation began to materialize. They were not merely affixing a name, they were fundamentally electing a distinct mode of existence within the world. Athens was thus destined to evolve into a polis that profoundly esteemed thorough deliberation, the diligent consideration of manifold viewpoints, and the meticulous evaluation of alternatives prior to reaching any resolution. In the ensuing weeks, as intelligence of this naming decision disseminated to contiguous settlements, an intriguing phenomenon occurred. Other communities commenced dispatching emissaries to personally behold this revered olive tree and to engage with these people who had conspicuously prioritized sagacity over mere theatrical display. These sojourners were not motivated by ambitions of conquest or commercial enterprise. Rather, their pilgrimage was driven by a desire to comprehend the intricate mechanics of decision-making, when genuine reciprocal listening was the guiding principle. Envision these nascent diplomatic encounters, wayfarers, their attire dust-laden from arduous mountain trails, being extended the solace of water and shade, subsequently engaging for hours in profound discourse. These were not the ceremonial pronouncements one might anticipate, but rather authentic, probing dialogues. Inquiries such as, "How did you ascertain the superior choice?" and "What transpires when individuals hold divergent opinions?" were explored with the unhurried patience characteristic of those unburdened by pressing temporal constraints. One particular visitor, a shrewd merchant hailing from a coastal village, prolonged his stay for 3 full days solely to scrutinize the Athenian methodology for collective decision-making. He observed them convening in a concentric formation beneath the sheltering olive tree, noted the ritualistic transference of a smooth, polished stone from one speaker to the next, and witnessed their attentive, truly attentive listening when another individual articulated their thoughts. Upon his homeward journey, he conveyed more than mere commercial wares. He carried the indelible recollection of an entirely distinct paradigm for resolving complex issues. As the seasons transitioned, the venerable olive tree burgeoned with renewed vigor, mirroring the ascendant reputation of the populace dwelling beneath its branches. Athens was progressively becoming renowned, not for its material affluence or its formidable warriors, but for an attribute considerably more uncommon. Its citizenry had cultivated the profound ability to engage in collective ideation. They were progressively developing what would ultimately be termed democracy, although the specific lexicon remained uncoined at that historical juncture. Their simpler designation for this practice was merely endeavoring to make sound judgments. The children maturing within early Athens assimilated these invaluable lessons simply by observing their elders. A young male child might sit quietly during communal deliberations, internalizing the understanding that every individual's perspective could potentially harbor a fragment of overarching truth. A female child might discern how her mother posed questions not with the intent to challenge or discredit, but rather to foster deeper comprehension. These children were being nurtured within the world's inaugural Academy of Citizenship, though none among them fully apprehended their role in shaping the annals of history. Years elapsed. The singular olive tree expanded into an extensive olive grove. The fledgling settlement blossomed into a proper town, subsequently evolving into a vibrant city. And throughout this sustained growth, the Athenians steadfastly adhered to that seminal realization: to embrace wisdom is to embark upon a trajectory that continuously yields benevolent returns. They established educational institutions where young people acquired not merely factual knowledge, but critically, the capacity to meticulously scrutinize those facts. They meticulously engineered public spaces where citizens could congregate to vigorously debate crucial societal concerns. Yet, arguably, their most significant achievement lay in their capacity to draw intellectual luminaries from across the known world. Philosophers, erudite teachers, eager students, individuals who had received whispers of a locale where the act of posing profound questions was esteemed more highly than possessing pre-formulated answers. These visitors would arrive anticipating the discovery of some arcane knowledge, some recondite sagacity. Instead, they encountered something both more elemental and more revolutionary: a community unequivocally committed to the collaborative pursuit of understanding. Among these distinguished visitors was a young man destined to be celebrated as Socrates. He arrived initially as merely another inquisitive wayfarer, yet he discovered in Athens a milieu where his ceaseless interrogations were enthusiastically embraced rather than merely tolerated. Here was a metropolis that had been fundamentally established upon the principle of selecting the judicious, thoughtful offering over the superficial, flamboyant one, and that foundational principle had organically cultivated a culture wherein the very act of cogitation was profoundly revered. Socrates would dedicate his entire existence to traversing the thoroughfares of Athens, engaging citizens from every stratum of society to inquire into the authentic meaning they ascribed to concepts such as justice, valor, or enlightenment. And precisely because these individuals were Athenians, reared within a cultural framework that honored meticulous deliberation, they routinely paused to earnestly contemplate his profound inquiries. This is the genesis of philosophy, not within cloistered academic towers, but within the quotidian conversations of individuals who had learned that the rigorous examination of one's convictions invariably fortifies their intellectual resilience. The disciples of Socrates, including the illustrious Plato, who in turn would instruct Aristotle, the mentor of Alexander the Great, propagated these seminal concepts far beyond the confines of Athens. They disseminated the profound notion that lucid thinking constituted a vital intellectual aptitude worthy of diligent cultivation, carrying it to royal courts and educational establishments throughout the entire known world. The unassuming decision forged beneath an olive tree had thus metamorphosed into a transformative force, fundamentally reshaping the trajectory of civilization. Nevertheless, even as Athens garnered widespread renown, its paramount strength remained its steadfast adherence to that original commitment, the unwavering preference for wisdom over mere spectacle. During epochs of profound crisis, when other city-states capitulated to the allure of tyrannical rulers or strong men offering facile remedies, Athens consistently reverted to its established process of collaboratively addressing and resolving complex issues. This approach was not always aesthetically pleasing, nor was it invariably swift, but it consistently yielded decisions endowed with enduring efficacy. The olive oil that provided illumination for their lamps evolved into a potent emblem of enlightenment itself, signifying not merely physical radiance, but the profound intellectual comprehension that emerges when individuals are prepared to critically scrutinize their presumptions and genuinely consider alternative perspectives. Athenian coinage proudly featured olive branches, yet they could just as aptly have depicted question marks, for that is truly what the city epitomized: the intellectual fortitude to persistently inquire, what if our current understanding is flawed, and how might we achieve a superior outcome? Centuries subsequently, when the formidable Roman Empire assimilated Athens, the Roman generals anticipated discovering military stratagems or hidden caches of material wealth. Instead, they unearthed libraries replete with philosophical inquiries, educational institutions where students were encouraged to respectfully challenge their instructors, and a populace that steadfastly insisted upon deliberating problems rather than merely complying with directives. The Romans were initially perplexed, then profoundly impressed, and ultimately transformed by the intellectual and civic treasures they encountered. And so, the designation of a city transcended a mere identifying label. It became a profound covenant concerning the potential for human interaction, when individuals recall that genuine wisdom frequently manifests in unassuming forms and communicates with quiet conviction. Today, When we invoke the concepts of Athenian democracy or the examined life, we are still inhabiting a world that germinated from that singular juncture when a community chose the practical, enduring gift over the ostentatious, ephemeral one, and subsequently possessed the profound patience to meticulously contemplate the far-reaching implications of that seminal choice. When those pioneering Athenians opted for Athena's olive tree over Poseidon's spring, they likely harbored no premonition that they were simultaneously determining the very nature of their morning repast for the ensuing millennium. Food, as it invariably transpires, shapes not only our corporeal forms, but also the entirety of our societal existence. And nowhere was this profound truth more evident than within the confines of ancient Athens. Envision a quintessential Athenian morning. Approximately 50 years after the city received its hallowed name, the sun ascends languidly over the craggy hillsides, imbuing the marble residences with a soft, golden luminescence. Within a modest dwelling situated near the bustling agora, a woman named Melania awakens before the break of dawn, stirred not by the jarring clangor of an alarm, but by the gentle rustling of her household as the nocturnal coolness gradually recedes. Her initial undertaking, a timeless responsibility shared by mothers across historical epochs, is the nourishment of her family. However, it is precisely at this juncture that ancient Athens truly unveils its distinctive character. Melania's preparation of the morning meal is both simpler and yet more profoundly significant than one might initially anticipate. She commences with bread, not the ethereal yielding loaves to which modern sensibilities are accustomed, but dense, robust bread meticulously crafted from barley. Wheat in that era was a costly commodity, reserved as a luxury for momentous occasions. Barley, conversely, constituted the foundational grain of everyday existence, substantial and satiating. It formed the indispensable cornerstone of every meal. Yet this essential bread was not consumed unadorned. Melania generously drizzled it with olive oil, that sacred endowment from Athena, and perhaps accentuated its flavor with a delicate sprinkling of sea salt, acquired through trade with coastal villages. This seemingly unassuming combination encapsulated the very essence of what rendered Athens viable: grain harvested from the fertile surrounding countryside, oil extracted from the hallowed groves, and salt procured from the expansive sea that served as their conduit to the wider world. Three fundamental ingredients, yet collectively they narrated the compelling saga of a civilization adeptly learning to flourish amidst a challenging and demanding landscape. As Melania commences the day's culinary rituals, she might incorporate a few olives, still piquant from the tree, cured in their autochthonous saline solution. Her children would be roused by the aromatic embrace of this unpretentious repast, imbibing from infancy that sustenance transcended mere caloric intake, serving instead as an intrinsic bond with their polis's essence. Each morsel of their staple grain evoked the diligent toil of the cultivators who nurtured the fertile cereal expanses. Each glistening bead of liquid gold encapsulated the hallowed narrative of their divine protectress. Yet breakfast was merely the prelude. Ancient Athenians possessed a culinary ethos that was both circumscribed in its variety and profoundly deliberate in its procurement compared to contemporary practices. They consumed provisions cultivated within close proximity, harvests dictated by the annual cycles, and commodities amenable to secure preservation against the lean winter period. This approach represented not an impediment, but a profound familiarity. Every Athenian citizen possessed an unequivocal understanding of their sustenance's provenance, because it was geographically constrained to their immediate environs. Lunch, often a less formalized interlude if observed distinctly, typically comprised desiccated ficus carica, a delicate curd derived from caprine lactation, and additional portions of their staple bread, anointed with olive oil. The figs were sufficiently saccharine to satiate what contemporary palates might term a confectionary desire, yet robust enough to sustain rigorous labor throughout the post-meridian hours. The cheese furnished vital proteins and indispensable calcium, crucial for the monumental construction of the sanctuaries and statuary that would confer enduring renown upon Athens. Again, these were unpretentious components, but each impeccably attuned to the prevailing climatic conditions and the prevailing societal norms. At this juncture, the narrative acquires a compelling dimension. This seeming unpretentiousness in their culinary practices engendered an unanticipated consequence. Because meals necessitated neither intricate culinary processes nor imported unusual components, the preparation phase was expedited, yet the consumption ritual was extended. Athenian families savored their modest repasts, engaging in spirited discourse, deliberating upon the day's occurrences, and recounting narratives. The communal dining surface transformed into a microcosm of democratic principles, an environment where even the youngest members of the household were initiated into the art of articulating viewpoints and attentively receiving those of their peers. The principal repast of the diurnal cycle, the evening meal, could incorporate Piscean offerings, contingent upon the household's proximity to the literal or their financial capacity to visit the agora's thalassic purveyors. These were often petite aquatic creatures, charbroiled in their entirety over glowing embers, imparting flavor through indigenous botanicals flourishing on the verdant slopes encircling the city, such as wild marjoram, common thyme, and fragrant rosemary. The pervasive effluvium emanating from innumerable hearths would waft languidly over the urban expanse as Helios descended, forging an olfactory tapestry that resonated as oikos, home, within the consciousness of every citizen. Vegetables occupied a more substantial position in the ancient Athenian diet than surpassing contemporary presumptions. This was not predicated upon a voluntary adherence to a plant-based regimen, but rather due to the prohibitive cost of animal protein and the consistent dependability of plant produce. Melania could present a hearty dish of pulses, specifically lentils, stewed with aromatic alliums and pungent garlic, or perhaps a savory puree of garbanzo beans, enriched with olive oil and fragrant botanicals. These dishes demanded a deliberate and unhurried approach for optimal execution, a culinary methodology of protracted simmering that afforded household members ample opportunity to congregate within the domestic hearth's ambit, engaging in conversation as the sustenance gently cooked. Wine was a ubiquitous accompaniment to the majority of evening repasts, though its consumption differed markedly from modern customs. Ancient wine was adulterated with hydrous elements, frequently in a ratio of 2 measures of water to 1 of wine, or occasionally even more attenuated. The intent was not inebriation, but rather to provide a palatable and potable liquid. Unadulterated aqua could pose health hazards, whereas its vinous admixture rendered it both agreeable to the palate and salubrious. Even juveniles partook of this attenuated beverage, thereby internalizing temperance as an inherent facet of their maturation. But perhaps the preeminent constituent in any Athenian meal was dialogue. Food was neither consumed tacitly nor expedited merely to transition towards purportedly more significant engagements. The repast itself constituted the pivotal engagement. This was the forum for familial deliberations, the crucible where progeny absorbed ancestral lore, and the nexus for communal tidings and the exchange of perspectives. The unadorned sustenance thus cultivated an environment conducive to intricate human connections. Festive occurrences introduced more sophisticated culinary offerings, yet, even in these instances, the paramount focus remained on collective participation rather than individual opulence. A sacred observance could present consecrated flesh, typically caprine or ovine, prepared by roasting and distributed communally among numerous households. These were not clandestine gratifications, but rather overt communal festivities, mechanisms for forging societal cohesion through the collective act of gastronomic enjoyment. Honey was the predominant saccharin agent. Given the absence of granulated sucrose, citizens would liberally anoint succulent produce, such as vinifera, malus, and pyrus, or blend it with comminuted nuts to fashion rudimentary sweetmeats. The honey originated from indigenous apiaries, frequently managed by successive familial lineages. Paralleling other dietary staples, it forged an intrinsic link to their terrestrial patrimony and their fellow citizens. The celebrated Athenian symposia, erudite assemblies that served as incubators for some of humanity's most profound philosophical deliberations, were intrinsically structured upon this distinctive culinary ethos. Attendees would repose upon cushioned cline, partaking of unpretentious provisions and carefully attenuated wine, concomitantly engaging in discourse on humanity's fundamental inquiries. The sustenance itself was not the primary objective, yet it cultivated the quintessential ambiance, one of ease, unhurried contemplation, and intellectual exchange. Seasonal eating constituted not a discretionary preference, but an unavoidable imperative in ancient Athens. The vernal season heralded the emergence of tender verdure and nascent horticultural produce. Aestus brought forth a profusion of succulent fruits and the vital oleaginous bounty. Autumn marked the period for harvesting nuciferous delights and autumnal fruits, alongside the crucial task of preserving provisions for the hibernal interlude. Hemal repasts were contingent upon stockpiled cereals, cured olives, desiccated fruits, and any perishable fare that could endure within the clement Mediterranean climatic zone. This seasonal rhythm influenced not merely their dietary constituents, but profoundly molded their conceptualization of temporal progression. Ancient Athenians existed in a more profound symbiosis with the rhythms of the natural world than contemporary societies. They possessed an inherent understanding that periods of plenty invariably succeed dearth, that the art of conservation held parity with the act of creation, and that a deliberate appreciation of unadorned gratifications frequently conferred more profound contentment than the hurried pursuit of ostentatious experiences. Food in ancient Athens transcended the mere provision of sustenance or even Epicurean delight. It was fundamentally interwoven with self-definition, collective belonging, and an intrinsic bond with their locale. Each repast served to fortify the foundational tenets that underpinned their nascent democratic system, namely, austerity, temperance, and the imperative of communal assembly for the joint partaking of nourishment and intellectual exchange. When one contemplates the seminal influence of those illustrious Athenian thinkers reshaping global thought, the mind may conjure images of them within grand marble edifices, engaged in dialectical contests concerning abstruse theories. Yet with equal frequency, they convened around unpretentious timber surfaces, partaking of common bread, olive oil, and wine, permitting wholesome provisions to cultivate an environment conducive to profound deliberation. Subsequent to the communal consumption of countless repasts comprising bread, oil, and unadorned dialogue, there arose the practical necessity for artisans to fashion the receptacles and goblets that contained these provisions. This narrative now introduces Cleomenes, a skilled ceramicist of Athens, whose dexterous hands molded not merely malleable earth, but implicitly the quotidian existence of an entire polis, a profound impact he likely never consciously apprehended. Cleomenes rouses himself ere the first glimmer of dawn, not compelled by external obligation, but rather by an internalized somatic cadence, honed over 2 decades of dedicated ceramic artistry. Beyond the modest confines of his atelier, the city of Athens largely slumbers in tranquility. A scattering of early risers attend to the ritual of water retrieval from communal cisterns, their measured perambulations resonating gently against the hewn stone masonry. The atmosphere retains the crisp vestiges of nocturne, subtly mingled with intimations of the impending diurnal warmth, an optimal meteorological tableau for the manipulation of argillaceous material. His workshop is situated merely a stone's throw from one of Athens' unpaved thoroughfares, positioned sufficiently proximate to the agora to entice patronage, yet sufficiently distant to preclude the acoustic intrusion of his turning wheel from disquieting the erudite thinkers and bustling traders who frequent that civic hub. The edifice itself presents an unassuming facade, stout stone walls, a terracotta-tiled canopy, and a capacious aperture capable of being secured by timber shutters during inclement meteorological conditions. However, this simplicity belies any notion of crudity. Rather, each plane within this domain bears the indelible impress of years of meticulous engagement. The inaugural undertaking of any ceramicist's diurnal routine involves the meticulous assessment of the argil. Cleomenes stores his raw material within voluminous amphorae, shrouded by moistened textiles to preserve an optimal hygrometric state. He works a small portion between his digits, discerning its granular composition and ductile qualities. Should it prove unduly desiccated, it will invariably fracture during the formative process. Conversely, excessive hydration will render it incapable of retaining its intended configuration. The preparation of the clay resembles the preliminary steps to an intimate dialogue with a long-acquainted confidant. One must intuitively grasp its inherent disposition and variable characteristics. This particular expertise is devoid of ostentation, yet profoundly indispensable. Cleomenes meticulously incorporates water, droplet by droplet, assiduously blending it with his bare hands until the plasticity achieves an impeccable equilibrium. This is knowledge that defies explicit codification or verbal elucidation, being attainable solely through a prolonged, daily tactile engagement with the ceramic medium. His skilled hands possess an innate comprehension that eludes his conscious intellect, akin to a matriarch's intuitive discernment of her infant's varied vocal expressions. With the nascent illumination of the firmament by the ascending sun, Cleomenes initiates the rotation of his potter's apparatus. Distinct from the electrically powered mechanisms prevalent in the contemporary era, this is a substantial lithic platen, propelled into gyration by the rhythmic action of his foot. The resultant cadence possesses a contemplative quality, a thrust, a revolution, a thrust, a revolution. The accompanying auditory output is soft and unceasing, evocative of a cardiac pulse or the remote murmur of oceanic breakers. Nearby residents frequently remark upon the tranquilizing effect of this sound, perceiving it as a steadfast and comforting element in their daily existence. On this particular day, his focus is directed towards fabricating utilitarian receptacles, eschewing ornate ritualistic artifacts in favor of quotidian vessels designed for the common populace. These are the very bowls from which Athenian households will partake of their nourishing lentil stews and rich olive oil, within which progeny will acquire the dexterity of spoon manipulation, and wherein residual provisions will be preserved and equitably distributed. These creations are not destined for veneration within curatorial collections, yet they represent the foundational implements that rendered the very fabric of civilization feasible. The initial and paramount stage involves equilibrating the argil upon the turning mechanism, a task whose difficulty often belies its apparent simplicity. Impeccable centering is non-negotiable, for any deviation will inevitably lead to an asymmetrical and flawed subsequent formation. Cleomenes applies subtle pressure with his polices, incrementally refining the placement until the ceramic mass rotates with unwavering stability. A profound sense of gratification accompanies that instant when perfect equilibrium is attained, whereupon the recalcitrant clay ceases its resistance and commences its willing collaboration. As he meticulously sculpts the initial vessel, his thoughts naturally drift towards the fundamental origins of the clay he manipulates. This particular earthy compound is sourced from ancient deposits situated approximately a full day's journey on foot from the heart of Athens, a location renowned for its soil's exquisitely balanced composition of essential minerals. He possesses an intimate acquaintance with the individual responsible for its excavation, the dependable pack animal that transports it to the bustling marketplace, and the precise itinerary it follows to finally reach the sanctity of his own workshop. In the vibrant civilization of ancient Athens, such a profound, direct connection to the fundamental sources of one's raw materials was an inescapable reality, starkly contrasting with the often impersonal disengagement prevalent in contemporary society. The pliable clay gracefully ascends under the experienced touch of his hands, progressively assuming the precise contours he has envisioned. Yet, the craft of pottery is fundamentally distinct from the assertive act of sculpture. The ceramicist does not arbitrarily impose his absolute will upon the material. Instead, he engages in a delicate collaboration, respectfully working in concert with the clay's inherent characteristics and natural tendencies, gently guiding it towards a state of ultimate utility. An application of excessive force invariably results in the immediate collapse of the delicate walls. Conversely, an insufficient pressure leaves the potential bowl stubbornly flat and utterly devoid of purpose. This intricate process constitutes an unceasing negotiation, demanding both unwavering forbearance and acute, focused perception. As the morning hours steadily advance, Cleomenes's first patrons gradually begin to frequent his establishment. Among them is a youthful mother, in urgent need of a replacement feeding cup for her energetic toddler. The previous vessel had unfortunately shattered just yesterday, dislodged from a surface by the child's inadvertent tumble. She carefully handles an array of available options, meticulously assessing their inherent weight and stability, and ensuring that the drinking rim is sufficiently smooth and gentle for delicate infantile lips. This interaction transcends a mere commercial transaction. It blossoms into a heartfelt exchange concerning the universal challenges of nurturing young offspring, and the persistent trials inherent in raising spirited children within a dwelling characterized by unforgiving stone floors. Subsequently, a venerable gentleman pauses his journey to commission a bespoke water jar, destined for his daughter's momentous wedding celebration. He articulates his specific requirements with a thoughtful solemnity, a piece that is distinctly unostentatious, yet sufficiently elegant to appropriately commemorate such a significant occasion. Cleomenes listens with undivided attention, posing insightful questions regarding its desired dimensions and ornamental embellishments. Their conversation naturally progresses to encompass the forthcoming nuptials, the young couple's future aspirations, and the father's deeply held hopes for his daughter's impending married life. In this manner, the creation of pottery frequently serves as a poignant pretext for authentic human connection, a role it often fulfilled within the communal fabric of ancient Athens. Approaching the zenith of the day around midday, when the generous sunlight permeates the workshop, rendering it comfortably warm and inviting, Cleomenes momentarily suspends his primary labors for a modest luncheon. His simple repast comprises wholesome bread, a drizzle of fragrant olive oil, a handful of briny olives, and a portion of creamy, soft cheese. Nevertheless, even during this brief interlude for physical sustenance, his hands remain purposefully engaged. He meticulously inspects pieces crafted on the previous day that have undergone an overnight drying period, diligently scrutinizing them for any nascent fissures or subtle imperfections. Some of these creations are deemed prepared for their inaugural firing within the kiln. Others, however, still necessitate an extended period of desiccation. The robust kiln, situated directly behind his primary workspace, represents simultaneously the most pivotal and potentially perilous component of his entire ceramic operation. This formidable stone edifice, a testament to his own construction prowess, was meticulously engineered to achieve the intensely elevated temperatures requisite for transmuting pliant, raw clay into resilient, enduring pottery. The intricate process of loading this vital apparatus demands meticulous forethought and strategic placement. More substantial items are carefully positioned at the base, while smaller, more delicate pieces are securely nested higher within the chamber, ensuring every item is arranged for optimal and uniform heat distribution. Nevertheless, the present day is not designated for the intense ritual of firing. Rather, it is dedicated to the industrious creation of fresh works, systematically accumulating sufficient stock to render the subsequent firing session economically viable and efficient. Cleomenes resumes his position at the potter's wheel, commencing the fabrication of more substantial storage jars. These particular vessels necessitate a greater volume of clay, an increased application of physical strength, and an even more exacting degree of vigilance to maintain the consistent thickness of their walls as they progressively ascend. Throughout his labor, the afternoon's illumination undergoes a subtle transformation, compelling the potter to adapt his workflow accordingly. Unfiltered direct sunlight possesses the detrimental capacity to desiccate the clay with undue rapidity, potentially inducing structural fissures. Consequently, he strategically alters his stance, relocates partially formed pieces to areas offering more shade, and carefully drapes works in progress with moistened cloths. The atmospheric conditions, therefore, are not external phenomena occurring independently of his craft. Instead, they function as integral, dynamic collaborators in the genesis of each individual creation. The waning hours of the afternoon usher in a new cohort of clientele, men concluding their daily labors in the bustling agora, now seeking replacements for damaged domestic implements, or perhaps a finely crafted oil lamp intended as a thoughtful present for their spouses. Youngsters, their eyes wide with unbridled curiosity, frequently peer into the workshop, utterly captivated by the miraculous metamorphosis of humble earth into functional and beautiful artifacts. Cleomenes, on occasion, indulges their interest by permitting them to experiment with small portions of clay, recognizing intuitively that the inquisitive child of today holds the potential to evolve into the skilled artisan of tomorrow. The mesmerizing cadence of the potter's wheel engenders a distinctive temporal experience, one that stands in stark contrast to the relentless urgency characteristic of contemporary existence. It embodies instead the measured, unhurried tempo intrinsic to processes that simply cannot be accelerated. The clay itself mandates specific intervals, time for precise centering, for controlled ascension, for gradual desiccation, and for transformative firing. A true potter cultivates the profound understanding necessary to harmonize with these inherent, natural rhythms, rather than futilely contending against them. This particular methodology contains a sagacious insight, the applicability of which extends considerably beyond the specific domain of ceramic craftsmanship. With the onset of evening, Cleomenes commences the systematic tidying of his workshop. Unused clay must be meticulously shielded to preserve its essential moisture content. All implements require thorough cleansing and orderly storage. The entire workspace is swept clean, ridding it of accumulated clay fragments and fine dust. This diligent activity, however, transcends mere routine upkeep. It represents a crucial preparatory phase for the following day, meticulously designed to guarantee that each subsequent morning can commence with seamless efficiency and optimal productivity. The thoroughfares beyond the workshop are, predictably, coated in a fine layer of dust, incessantly disturbed by the footsteps of citizens making their way homeward after extended periods of labor, commerce, and social discourse. Yet, within the quiet confines of the pottery workshop, every element is meticulously arranged for the advent of another day dedicated to the alchemical transformation of elemental earth into artifacts destined to fulfill fundamental human requirements. The bowls painstakingly formed this very day are poised to contain the sustenance of future meals. The oil lamps, carefully crafted, will illuminate tomorrow's intimate discussions. And the robust storage jars will dutifully safeguard the precious olive oil, a vital commodity that inextricably links every Athenian repast to their revered patron goddess. Prior to departing for his own familial evening meal, Cleomenes casts a final discerning glance over the cumulative output of his day's labor. Ordered rows of freshly shaped bowls rest in various stages of desiccation upon sturdy wooden shelves. Each individual piece exhibits subtle distinctions, a testament to its unique genesis, notwithstanding its creation through identical foundational techniques. This inherent variability is not perceived as a defect. Rather, it serves as irrefutable evidence of their artisanal origin, affirming that human hands meticulously fashioned these objects, and that each one inherently embodies a fraction of the craftsman's dedicated focus and diligent solicitude. Within the societal framework of ancient Athens, artisans such as Cleomenes, who dedicated themselves to the craft of pottery, occupied an indispensable position, despite seldom achieving widespread renown or significant affluence. These were the unassuming practitioners whose specialized abilities rendered the mundane realities of daily existence feasible, guaranteeing that sustenance could be presented, water securely contained, and precious oil precisely measured and conserved. Their workshops functioned as crucibles where raw earth was transmuted into articles of utility, where steadfast endurance yielded tangible results, and where the methodical process of creation forged an intimate bond between human dexterity and the elemental substances of their environment. Each and every Athenian domicile relied implicitly upon the contributions of such skilled craftspeople, although the majority of the populace likely regarded their labor as a given, a common oversight for essential services that frequently escape notice until their absence is acutely felt. Concurrently, as Cleomenes diligently molded clay within the confines of his workshop, and mortal families partook of their unpretentious evening repasts, high above the terrestrial realm, upon the majestic peak of Mount Olympus, the Olympian deities were engrossed in their own distinct iteration of daily existence, and strikingly akin to human familial units. This celestial routine encompassed a considerable and often surprising measure of interpersonal contention. These were not the grandiose, cinematic clashes frequently depicted in popular media. Rather, the preponderance of divine disagreements centered upon matters that would resonate with astonishing familiarity for anyone accustomed to cohabiting with other individuals. Envision the tableau. It is a tranquil afternoon unfolding across the celestial expanse of Mount Olympus, and the assembled gods are, in essence, partaking in a familial supper. Zeus presides at the apex of an elongated, lustrous marble table, his position dictated not by any preeminent sagacity or equitable judgment, but simply by virtue of his seniority and paramount might, a dynamic frequently observed within human household structures. The lavish table is laden with an inexhaustible supply of ambrosia and nectar, provisions that are eternally replenishable and utterly impervious to decay. Attributes one might reasonably presume would eradicate any potential for discord. This presumption, however, would prove entirely mistaken. The inaugural contention ignites, as is often the case with domestic disputes, over a matter of utterly negligible significance. Apollo casually remarks upon an apparent increase in devotional supplications from his mortal adherents, specifically musicians and poets. Artemis, his identical twin sister, swiftly interjects, asserting that her own devotees, comprising skilled hunters and fiercely independent women, have demonstrated a comparable level of recent fidelity. What commences as an innocuous exchange gradually transmutes into an overt rivalry, a contest to establish whose divine influence is greater, whose worship is more fervent, and whose presence is more indispensable to the fabric of human existence. Athena, positioned with composed dignity to Zeus's right, observes this recurrent behavioral sequence with an air of detached wisdom. She comprehends a profound truth that typically eludes mortals for extended periods. The majority of disagreements are rarely predicated upon their superficial subject matter. Apollo and Artemis are not genuinely contending over quantitative prayer metrics. Rather, They are grappling with the identical, fundamental existential inquiries that confront all siblings. What is my individual identity within this familial structure? How does my existence hold significance? What unique qualities distinguish me? The underlying reality is that the Greek gods engaged in conflict for precisely the same fundamental reasons that human families do. They cohabited in close proximity, possessed distinctly individual temperaments, and were bound to one another for an unending perpetuity. Envision a perpetual existence where one is incapable of ever vacating their formative residence, utterly unable to alter their professional calling, and forever unable to circumvent encounters with kin during festive periods. Now, compound this scenario by conceiving that every member of this familial unit wields boundless supernatural capabilities and harbors resentments that endure for millennia. This precise confluence of factors provides the definitive formula for the intricate and volatile dynamics of the Olympian family. Consider, by way of illustration, the perennial discord between Hera and Zeus. Their conjugal disagreements were emphatically not epic cosmic struggles between opposing forces of order and disorder. Rather, they mirrored the predictable contentions of a long-established marital pair who had, over eons, mastered the art of provoking each other with almost surgical exactitude. Zeus would engage in dalliances with mortal females, not invariably propelled by an overwhelming surge of amorous fervor, but often precisely because he was acutely aware that such actions would invariably vex and exasperate Hera. Hera, in turn, would retaliate with intricately conceived schemes of retribution, driven not by an intrinsic malevolence, but fundamentally by a profound sense of being disregarded and undervalued. Their protracted disputes typically adhered to discernibly predictable sequences. Zeus would initiate a transgression, invariably characterized by its thoughtlessness and egocentricity. Hera would then respond with punitive measures directed at an individual tangentially connected to Zeus's misbehavior, most commonly a blameless mortal woman who had unwittingly captured his fleeting interest. Zeus, predictably, would adopt a defensive posture, leveling accusations of overreaction against Hera. Hera, with undeniable accuracy, would then highlight Zeus's consistent failure to contemplate the ramifications of his conduct upon others. In this cyclical fashion, their arguments would recur endlessly, perpetually failing to address or ameliorate the fundamental, unresolved grievances that fueled their eternal marital strife. The intriguing aspect of these divine altercations was their inherent utility. They served a crucial purpose. The Olympian deities were actively endeavoring to discern how they might coexist harmoniously, while simultaneously safeguarding their distinct individual identities and specific responsibilities. Each god or goddess presided over a particular sphere, be it the tumultuous realm of warfare, the tender domain of love, the profound depths of wisdom, or the vast expanse of the sea. Yet, these individual domains perpetually intersected and intertwined within the intricate tapestry of mortal existence. One might ponder, for instance, how to precisely delineate Athena's sagacious counsel from the pervasive influence of Aphrodite upon enamored individuals, or where the brutal cessation of warfare concludes and Apollo's benevolent protection of urban centers commences. Fundamentally, the gods' spirited debates constituted a series of boundary negotiations, mirroring precisely the type of intricate discussions that inevitably transpire within any communal living arrangement. Queries would frequently arise. who bears the ultimate responsibility for this particular aspect. How shall we effectively manage situations when our respective duties inevitably come into conflict? What course of action should be taken when mortals, in their desperation, direct their fervent supplications to multiple deities concerning an identical predicament? These were by no means ethereal, abstract theological quandaries. Rather, they represented eminently practical considerations pertaining to the meticulous management of the divine household. The renowned contest between Poseidon and Athena for dominion over the illustrious city of Athens was, in essence, archetypal of how these disagreements typically unfolded. Two powerful deities would discover their interests overlapping within the same specific scenario. Instead of pursuing a collaborative approach, which would inherently necessitate an acknowledgement of their mutual interdependence, they would engage in a spirited rivalry, striving to demonstrate who could furnish superior service or a more compelling offering. The victor not only garnered the coveted credit, but more significantly, achieved a heightened degree of clarity regarding their established role and intrinsic value within the sprawling divine family structure. Occasionally, these contentious exchanges revolved around matters of respect and due recognition. Demeter, the venerable goddess entrusted with the nurturing of all burgeoning flora, would frequently experience profound frustration when mortal inhabitants cavalierly took bounteous harvests for granted, reserving their earnest prayers solely for times of agricultural blight. Her profound anger was not merely an expression of divine haughtiness. It was, rather, a deeply human sentiment of being acknowledged only in moments of adversity. When she dramatically withheld her precious gifts, thereby precipitating the harsh onset of winter, she was, in essence, conveying a powerful message. You scarcely perceive my presence when conditions are favorable, but perhaps my absence will command your attention when misfortune strikes. And other disagreements centered squarely on issues of personal boundaries and individual space. Artemis, the fiercely independent goddess, adamantly insisted upon her unmarried status, not out of any animosity towards men, but due to her profound reverence for autonomy and her resolute desire to prevent her distinct identity from being subsumed by another's. When other deities or even mortals attempted to exert pressure upon her to engage in romantic entanglements, she would defend her personal choices with the same unyielding resolve characteristic of any individual whose life decisions have been subjected to intrusive questioning by family members. The deity who perhaps possessed the most profound comprehension of intricate family dynamics was likely Hestia, the serene goddess of the hearth and home. She seldom permitted herself to become entangled in the boisterous arguments of her divine kin, choosing instead to concentrate her energies on meticulously maintaining the sacred spaces where familial life organically unfolded. While her siblings vociferously contended over territorial claims and personal accolades, Hestia steadfastly kept the home fires burning, both literally and metaphorically. She intuitively grasped the fundamental necessity of one entity serving as the unwavering, stable core around which the entirety of the divine drama could safely yet dramatically revolve. Nevertheless, even Hestia, with her boundless patience, possessed her limits. When the escalating arguments among the other gods began to tangibly impact mortal families, when divine disputes tragically instigated wars that forcibly severed parents from their beloved children, or when godly retribution mercilessly shattered human households, Hestia would, with quiet authority, interject. Her interventions were exceedingly rare, but invariably effective, primarily because every deity understood that she would only become involved when matters had undeniably progressed beyond an acceptable threshold. The gods' debates also vividly reflected their divergent methodologies for problem-solving. Ares, the impetuous god of war, was inclined to confront every issue immediately, bringing conflict into the open and resolving it through direct, often violent, confrontation. Athena, in stark contrast, favored meticulous strategic thinking and comprehensive long-term planning. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, firmly believed that the majority of problems could be ameliorated through the cultivation of superior relationships and profound emotional connections. Hermes, the cunning messenger god, was convinced that virtually any predicament could be successfully navigated and resolved through astute negotiation, provided one identified the optimal angle or leverage point. These were not merely superficial personality quirks. They represented genuinely distinct and equally valid approaches to navigating conflict. The gods' debates served as a crucible, testing these diverse methodologies against one another. When mortals found themselves grappling with arduous circumstances, they possessed the unique opportunity to observe how their revered deities addressed analogous challenges, thereby enabling them to judiciously select the approach that appeared most germane to their own specific predicaments. Perhaps the most profoundly human characteristic embedded within these divine arguments was their customary conclusion, not with a definitive, all-encompassing resolution, but rather with temporary armistices born of sheer exhaustion and the pressing imperative to resume the rhythms of daily existence. Zeus, the paramount deity, would invariably declare that every participant had sufficiently articulated their viewpoint, and it was now incumbent upon all to refocus on their weighty responsibilities. The gods would then tacitly agree to disagree, at least until such a time as their domains inevitably intersected once more, rekindling old tensions. These pragmatic truces were not indicative of failure. Rather, they were sagacious acknowledgments that certain fundamental tensions are an inherent and permanent feature of communal living. The gods progressively learned to adeptly manage their conflicts instead of striving for their complete eradication, discovering sophisticated methods of disagreeing without irrevocably damaging their fundamental relationships. This, in fact, represented an extraordinarily sophisticated approach to complex family dynamics, one from which numerous mortal families could undoubtedly derive considerable benefit and insight. Consequently, when the ancient Greeks meticulously recounted tales of their perpetually squabbling deities, they were not merely amusing themselves with narratives akin to a divine soap opera. They were, in fact, profoundly exploring the timeless challenges inherent in family life, the intricate mechanisms of community cooperation, and the perpetual quest for individual identity within the broader context of group belonging. The gods contended for precisely the same reasons that humans engage in conflict, because genuinely caring about something invariably entails moments of disagreement, because communal living necessitates an unceasing process of negotiation, and because even immortal beings must ultimately discern how to preserve their unique selves while simultaneously remaining an integral component of a greater whole. Just as the gods painstakingly navigated their complex family dynamics around that legendary, eternal marble table down on earth, the tangible ramifications of their divine attention and their spirited arguments manifested in profoundly human ways. This is the unfolding narrative of Nicias, a humble farmer who resided on the outskirts of Athens, and the pivotal day his otherwise ordinary existence intersected with divine intervention in the most remarkably mundane fashion imaginable. Nicias was not a person of extraordinary renown, which is precisely what rendered him the ideal protagonist for this particular chronicle. He diligently tilled a modest parcel of land that his ancestors had cultivated for 3 successive generations. A challenging, rocky soil that demanded both unwavering patience and persistent effort to yield even a respectable harvest. His venerable olive trees, though ancient, were dependably productive. His barley grew with consistent, albeit not lavish, abundance, and his small vineyard produced sufficient wine for his family's consumption, with a modest surplus available for trade in the local marketplace. On the particular morning our story commences, Nicias awoke to a deeply disquieting discovery. His finest olive tree, the one renowned for consistently producing the largest and most exquisitely flavored olives, was exhibiting unequivocal signs of disease. Its leaves were visibly yellowing and precipitously dropping, and several of its branches appeared alarmingly brittle and desiccated. For a farmer, such an observation initiates the day with a profound sense of worry settling heavily in the pit of one's stomach. Nicias had, in his lifetime, contended with plant diseases on previous occasions. It is an inevitable aspect of every farmer's existence. He was intimately familiar with the customary remedies, the careful pruning away of affected branches, the judicious adjustment of watering schedules, and sometimes the strategic relocation of soil around the root system. However, this particular affliction presented differently. It appeared far more severe than anything he had encountered in his extensive experience. The tree was ancient, having been planted by his esteemed grandfather, and its loss would signify not merely the forfeiture of the current year's harvest, but also the cessation of decades of anticipated future production. He dedicated the entire morning to meticulously examining the afflicted tree from every conceivable angle, running his calloused hands over its gnarled bark, testing the pliability of its branches, and even critically tasting the soil surrounding its roots. This is the instinctive behavior of farmers when gripped by apprehension. They assiduously gather information utilizing all their senses, fervently hoping to comprehend what has gone awry, and crucially, how to rectify the situation. Around midday, as the potent Mediterranean sun rendered physical exertion increasingly uncomfortable, Nicias sought respite in the dappled shade of his ailing olive tree. He partook of a simple repast, the timeless combination of bread, olive oil, and olives. However, his usual robust appetite was notably diminished. Gazing upwards at the yellowing foliage above him, he found himself engaging in an activity he rarely undertook. He began to pray. Truly pray. Not merely the perfunctory acknowledgments most people offered to the gods, but a sincere plea. Athena, he uttered quietly, feeling a fleeting pang of foolishness for addressing the seemingly empty air. This venerable tree originates from the very olive you graciously bestowed upon Athens. If there is a different course of action I should be pursuing, something I am failing to perceive, I would profoundly appreciate your divine guidance. It was not an elaborate or ornate supplication, but rather an honest, heartfelt request emanating from an individual who had exhausted his own earthly solutions. What transpired next would have been utterly unremarkable had Nicias not been acutely observant. A woman steadily walked along the dusty thoroughfare that meandered past his farm. Her presence was not at all unusual. given that the road served as a vital artery connecting several rural communities to the bustling metropolis of Athens. She appeared to be of middle age, clad in unadorned traveling attire, carrying a sturdy walking stick and a small bundle that suggested she was embarked upon a journey of considerable length. She paused momentarily at his gate, much as travelers occasionally did when in need of directions or a refreshing drink of water. Nicias, adhering strictly to the time-honored rural Greek tradition of hospitality, promptly offered her a place in the shade and a draught from his cool well. She accepted his kindness with evident gratitude, gently setting down her bundle and settling comfortably into the shade cast by the troubled olive tree. "That is a truly magnificent tree," she remarked, her gaze directed upwards into its branches. "It is ancient, is it not? The kind that has been yielding its bounty for many decades." Her voice possessed a distinctive quality, not formally educated in the academic sense, yet imbued with the profound wisdom that accrues from extensive first-hand experience with the vicissitudes of the world. "Indeed, it is ancient," Nicias concurred, a note of sorrow in his voice. "But alas, it is now unwell. I am utterly unable to discern the nature of its affliction." He found himself recounting the details of his morning's exhaustive investigation, meticulously describing the troubling symptoms he had observed and the various remedies he had already attempted. The woman listened with an engrossing attentiveness that subtly encouraged him to continue his narrative. "Have you truly examined the foundational elements?" she inquired with a casual air, her tone suggesting a simple observation. "Occasionally, the underlying issue does not manifest within the visible branches." She then rose gracefully and proceeded to circumnavigate the tree's sturdy trunk, her walking stick serving as a pointer to areas where the earth displayed distinct characteristics: a subtle elevation, a slight depression, or variations in its hue and composition. As Nicias followed her discerning gaze, he began to perceive patterns that had previously eluded his attention. The disruptions in the soil formed discernible, albeit irregular lines that radiated outwards from the tree, strongly indicating subterranean activity. "These are creatures of the earth," the woman stated matter-of-factly, "most likely voles or other burrowing animals. They are not directly responsible for the tree's demise, but their persistent damage to the intricate root system is undoubtedly causing it significant stress and weakening its vitality." She then demonstrated a method for validating this hypothesis, meticulously excavating small apertures at regular intervals around the tree's circumference to inspect the roots without inflicting further harm. True to her prediction, several locations revealed roots that bore the unmistakable marks of gnawing, alongside evidence of diminutive tunnels. The proposed remedy was not overly complex. The judicious placement of specific botanical species that these animals inherently avoided, coupled with a fundamental trapping strategy. However, its effective implementation necessitated a depth of knowledge that Nicias simply did not possess prior to this encounter. "How did you come to discern such a specific problem?" he queried, his voice imbued with genuine curiosity. The woman responded with a gentle smile, one that subtly conveyed her familiarity with such inquiries. "Through extensive experience," she responded succinctly. "I have observed countless olive trees throughout my life. One gradually learns to interpret the subtle signals they consistently transmit." She graciously accepted another vessel of water, courteously declined his offer of sustenance and prepared to resume her journey. As she gathered her meager possessions, she imparted a final piece of sagacious counsel. Do not merely rectify this immediate problem. Instead, internalize its lessons. Observe how your trees communicate their needs to you. They will unequivocally convey what they require if you are attentive to the appropriate indicators. With that, she departed, continuing her solitary trek down the dusty thoroughfare leading towards the illustrious city of Athens. Nicias remained transfixed, watching her receding figure until she vanished beyond a distant bend in the road. He then redirected his attention to his olive tree, now imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. The solution she had proposed resonated with perfect logic, and he realized he possessed all the requisite materials to implement it without delay. In the ensuing weeks, as Nicias diligently worked to eradicate the burrowing creatures and facilitate his tree's recovery, he began to perceive other vital details that he had habitually overlooked. Indications of insect infestations on his verdant grapevines, nascent signs of fungal blight within his barley crops, and distinct patterns among his other olive trees suggesting varying degrees of prosperity, some flourishing robustly while others languished. All became conspicuously apparent once he understood precisely what to seek. It was as if that fleeting conversation with the itinerant woman had not merely furnished him with a specific remedy, but had fundamentally imparted a novel paradigm for apprehending his entire agricultural enterprise. His crop yields demonstrably improved. His trees exhibited a newfound vigor and health. Neighbors, observing his remarkable success, began to solicit his counsel when confronted with analogous challenges, and he discovered he could frequently assist them in a manner akin to how he himself had been aided. However, it is at this juncture that the narrative acquires an intriguing dimension. When Nicias endeavored to recount to others the transformative encounter that had revolutionized his farming practices, no one truly accorded him full credence. It was not that they suspected him of fabrication, but rather they presumed he was embellishing what they perceived as an unremarkable meeting with an unusually well-informed sojourner. Deities do not descend upon farms to dispense agricultural wisdom, his brother-in-law judiciously asserted. If Athena intended to assist agrarian folk, would she not manifest her presence in a more spectacular fashion, perhaps by sending a divine vision, or by speaking through the pronouncements of a priest? This constituted the most rational and pragmatic response, and Nicias found himself unable to dispute its inherent logic. Even Nicias himself began to harbor doubts, questioning whether he had perhaps projected a divine attribute onto what was essentially a human interaction. The woman had presented herself as entirely human, fatigued from her travels, genuinely appreciative of the offered water, and knowledgeable in the manner characteristic of individuals endowed with extensive practical experience. Nothing about her physical appearance or demeanor had overtly proclaimed, "I am a goddess." Perhaps he had simply been fortunate enough to encounter someone who possessed a greater understanding of olive trees than he did. Yet, as the months unfolded and his farm continued to flourish, employing techniques and insights that had all originated from that singular discourse, Nicias began to grasp a profound truth regarding the actual mechanisms of divine intervention in human existence. Celestial assistance does not invariably arrive accompanied by bolts of lightning and dramatic proclamations. Occasionally, it manifests as precisely the correct knowledge materializing at precisely the opportune moment, conveyed by an individual who appears to be nothing more than a benevolent stranger. The other farmers who benefited from Nicias's burgeoning expertise were, in their own way, also receiving divine aid, though they would never consciously identify it as such. Athena's profound gift, the innate comprehension of how to interpret and respond to the intricate dynamics of the natural world, was disseminating throughout the community, one conversation at a time, through the most unassuming and practical means imaginable. Many years subsequently, when Nicias had achieved widespread renown throughout the region as an individual possessing an unparalleled understanding of how to elicit optimal yields from even the most challenging soil, he still pondered that momentous day. Had he, in truth, been graced by a visitation from Athena herself? Or had he merely been providentially positioned to encounter a sagacious woman at a juncture when his desperation rendered him uniquely receptive to wisdom? Ultimately, he came to the realization that the precise answer to this question was far less significant than he had initially believed. What truly mattered was that succor had arrived precisely when he most required it, in a form he could readily comprehend and effectively utilize. Irrespective of whether that assistance was divine or purely human, it had fundamentally transformed not only his agricultural practices, but also his entire philosophical approach to problem-solving. He had learned to meticulously seek out underlying patterns, to cultivate an acute awareness of subtle indicators, and to recognize that viable solutions frequently emanate from unforeseen sources. The gods, Nicias eventually concluded, likely operate in this fashion more often than not through spectacular miracles that command global attention, but through those quiet, unassuming instances when exactly the right insight converges with exactly the right necessity, delivered by seemingly ordinary individuals who may not even be cognizant of their role as divine conduits. And if no one chooses to believe these narratives when we share them, well, perhaps that is precisely as it should be. The most efficacious forms of assistance often prove more effective when they operate without drawing undue attention to themselves. While Nicias was diligently learning to decipher the subtle communications emanating from his olive trees, concurrently in Athens, skilled artisans were meticulously preparing to fashion a monument that would articulate its message across millennia without uttering a single audible word. The Parthenon, that iconic temple still universally recognized in our contemporary era, was constructed employing techniques so exquisitely precise and patiently executed that they appear almost inconceivable until one grasps the fundamental mindset of a civilization that perceived and measured time in a fundamentally different manner than we do today. The genesis of this monumental undertaking does not commence with master architects sketching grandiose blueprints, but rather with Callicrates, an exceptionally skilled stonemason running his calloused, experienced hands over colossal blocks of pristine marble. These blocks had journeyed an impressive 20 miles from the quarries of Mount Pentelicus to their final destination on the Athenian Acropolis. Each individual block weighed several tons, and each had been meticulously extracted from the quarry, utilizing implements no more sophisticated than bronze tools, wooden wedges, and an intimate, almost instinctive comprehension of how stone naturally cleaves along its inherent grain. Callicrates had dedicated 4 decades of his life to mastering the art of reading stone with the same discerning acuity that farmers apply to soil or potters to clay. He possessed an uncanny ability to ascertain by touch whether a particular piece of marble harbored internal imperfections that would inevitably manifest as structural problems months or even years into the future. He could accurately forecast how different blocks would endure the ravages of time over multiple decades, how they would expand and contract in response to fluctuating temperatures, and how they would settle under the immense cumulative weight of the blocks positioned above them. The Parthenon construction project demanded a level of precision that appears almost unattainable without the benefit of modern, sophisticated measuring instruments. Every single stone had to interlock flawlessly with its adjacent counterparts, not merely at the moment of its initial placement, but for centuries to come. There was no margin for error, no opportunity for rectification. Once a multi-ton marble block was meticulously positioned, any subsequent attempt to reposition it would necessitate the laborious dismantling of every structural element situated above it. This extraordinary precision was achieved through a system that, on the surface, sounds deceptively straightforward. Each individual stone was custom fabricated to fit its precise designated location within the grand edifice. Callicrates and his cohort of master craftsmen would meticulously shape each block to conform exactly to the minute irregularities present in the surfaces of the stones it would rest upon. This painstaking process ensured that every single stone was inherently unique, utterly irreplaceable, and specifically designed for one particular, indispensable spot within the entire magnificent structure. The intricate process commenced with scrupulous measurement, utilizing tools that appear rudimentary when juxtaposed with contemporary laser levels, yet were perfectly adequate and remarkably effective for the demanding task at hand. Bronze squares ensured the precise establishment of right angles. Plumb lines, meticulously fashioned from fine cord and carefully weighted stones, guaranteed the establishment of impeccably vertical alignments. Water levels, simple troughs filled with water that visibly indicated when surfaces were perfectly horizontal, provided an infallible means of ensuring that the massive foundational elements would be laid with absolute uniformity and evenness. However, the true stroke of genius resided in their profound understanding of weight distribution. Ancient Greek architects had astutely discovered that stone structures could attain extraordinary strength and resilience if the immense weight was distributed with meticulous precision, even in the complete absence of mortar or metallic reinforcements. The Parthenon was ingeniously designed such that each individual stone both supported and was simultaneously supported by its neighboring elements, thereby forging an intricate network of mutual interdependence that progressively gained strength and stability as more pieces were meticulously integrated into the burgeoning structure. The laborious work advanced at a pace considered slow by modern temporal benchmarks, yet steadily and consistently by ancient standards. Each morning, teams of dedicated craftsmen would converge upon the Acropolis as the nascent sun began to bathe the monumental marble blocks in a soft, ethereal golden light. The distinctive sound of bronze chisels striking stone would then commence, not the jarring cacophony of modern power tools, but rather the rhythmic, almost hypnotic tapping of metal against marble, which created a constant, almost musical backdrop to the ongoing construction efforts. The arduous process of shaping each individual stone block demanded an extraordinary degree of patience and meticulous dedication. A singular column drum, which constituted one segment of the towering vertical supports, designed to bear the structure's massive roof, could conceivably consume several weeks of concentrated labor before reaching completion. Initially, the raw, unhewn stone, freshly extracted from the quarry, underwent a preliminary carving to establish its rudimentary form. Subsequently, the exterior surface was progressively refined through the application of increasingly delicate tools, until it ultimately attained a lustrous, unblemished finish, meticulously crafted to capture and reflect the sun's brilliance for untold millennia. The majestic columns themselves stand as compelling evidence of the builder's profound and sophisticated comprehension of visual perception and optical phenomena. Far from being geometrically straight, the Parthenon's columns exhibit a subtle, deliberate outward curve known as entasis. This ingenious architectural refinement served to counteract an inherent optical illusion, which would otherwise cause perfectly rectilinear columns to appear to recede or cave in when observed from the ground level. This critical optical correction was not an afterthought, but an integral component of the initial design, meticulously incorporated into the fabrication of every single column drum from the very genesis of the project. The monumental task of transporting these immense stone masses necessitated engineering solutions that were as elegant in their conceptual simplicity as they were effective in practice. Ingeniously constructed wooden cranes, powered solely by human exertion through intricate systems of pulleys and precisely calibrated counterweights, possessed the remarkable capacity to hoist blocks weighing several tons into position. Furthermore, workers employed ramps, painstakingly constructed from a combination of stone and compacted earth, to facilitate the movement of materials to progressively elevated levels as the grand edifice steadily ascended towards its zenith. However, it is arguably the joinery, the intricate and precise method by which individual stone blocks were interconnected, that represents the most extraordinary facet of the Parthenon's construction. Eschewing the use of conventional mortar, the ancient builders devised a sophisticated system employing iron clamps and dowels. These were meticulously crafted metal components, precisely shaped and then securely embedded within corresponding, exquisitely cut grooves, carved directly into the stone blocks. To safeguard against the corrosive effects of moisture and time, these vital metal connectors were then encapsulated and sealed with molten lead. This innovative system of joinery conferred upon the structure a remarkable combination of both flexibility and inherent strength. The Parthenon, by virtue of these connections, possessed the capacity to subtly shift and accommodate the stresses induced by seismic activity or fluctuations in ambient temperature, all the while ensuring that the individual stone components remained securely interlocked and would not dislodge. In scenarios of extreme structural duress, should a metal connection unfortunately fail, it could be systematically replaced without necessitating the wholesale deconstruction of the entire building. This was, in essence, an engineering philosophy meticulously designed for both expedient repair and enduring longevity. The degree of precision demanded by this intricate joinery system was truly exceptional and unparalleled for its era. Callicrates, the master architect, would personally delineate and mark the exact infinitesimal position for each and every clamp and dowel. Following this, skilled artisans would meticulously carve the necessary recesses by hand, employing finely honed bronze chisels. The resultant fit between stone and metal was absolutely critical and had to be flawless, Any connection that was too loose would inevitably compromise structural integrity, leading to failure, while an overly tight fit risked the catastrophic cracking of the stone as the metal expanded under the intense heat of the Athenian summer sun. As the magnificent structure steadily rose skyward, each successive new level presented its own unique array of engineering challenges and problems that had not previously manifested. Intricate questions arose. How, for instance, could one guarantee the absolute vertical alignment of columns extending dozens of feet into the air? And how was one to precisely position a massive roof beam, weighing an astonishing 20 tons, with an accuracy measured in mere millimeters? The resourceful builders, through a process of continuous innovation and practical application, developed novel techniques and solutions on the fly, diligently learning and adapting from every formidable challenge they encountered. The breathtaking sculptural decoration, which today contributes immeasurably to the Parthenon's global renown, was not an aesthetic afterthought, but rather an intrinsic and integrated element of the overarching construction process. The pediments, those distinctive triangular architectural spaces situated above the columns and replete with intricate sculptured scenes, were ingeniously conceived to serve a dual purpose: to function as vital structural components of the edifice while simultaneously narrating the profound mythological tales of Athena's miraculous birth and her iconic contest with Poseidon for the patronage of Athens. For the dedicated craftsmen toiling on the Parthenon, their labor transcended the mundane confines of a mere occupation. It was perceived as a profound act of worship and spiritual devotion. They believed they were constructing a sacred dwelling for the goddess Athena, utilizing the very skills and talents that they attributed to her divine bestowal. Consequently, every painstakingly cut joint, every perfectly positioned stone block, represented not only a remarkable technical achievement, but also a tangible religious offering. The unparalleled quality and precision of their craftsmanship were thus inextricably linked to the depth and sincerity of their spiritual reverence. The entire construction endeavor spanned approximately 9 years, commencing in 447 BCE and culminating in 438 BCE. This remarkably swift timeline might initially appear impossibly rapid, until one considers the sheer scale of the coordinated effort. Hundreds of highly skilled craftsmen toiled concurrently, each specialized and responsible for distinct facets of the monumental project. Stonecutters, sculptors, metalworkers, carpenters, and painters all harmonized their diverse efforts, meticulously guided by a comprehensive master plan that resided primarily within the brilliant minds of the chief architects. Upon the final placement of the last stone and the completion of the ultimate piece of sculptural ornamentation, the Parthenon emerged as an unequivocal testament to the extraordinary heights that human skill, combined with unwavering patience, could collectively attain. Yet beyond this monumental achievement, it eloquently articulated a profound philosophy of construction, one that unreservedly prioritized enduring permanence over fleeting speed, uncompromising precision over mere convenience, and transcendent beauty over rudimentary utility. The sophisticated building techniques employed in the creation of the Parthenon fundamentally compelled its craftsmen to conceptualize time in terms of decades and centuries, rather than the more immediate horizons of months and years. They embarked upon the creation of an edifice expressly intended to outlast their own mortal lives, to endure beyond the generations of their children, and indeed, to persist longer than any single individual could possibly envision. This profound, long-term perspective permeated and influenced every single decision made, from the judicious selection of raw materials to the intricate methodologies of joinery. Today, more than 2 millennia subsequent to its completion, the Parthenon steadfastly endures. It has valiantly withstood the ravages of devastating earthquakes, numerous wars, catastrophic explosions, and countless centuries of relentless environmental exposure. Remarkably, the individual stone blocks continue to fit together with impeccable precision, held securely by the very same iron clamps and lead seals that Callicrates and his dedicated colleagues so meticulously installed. The magnificent structure has demonstrably outlasted the very civilization that conceived and erected it, perpetually imparting invaluable lessons concerning craftsmanship, perseverance, and the formidable power of human skill applied with unwavering dedication. The Parthenon was constructed entirely without the aid of nails or glue, a testament to its creator's profound understanding of a principle often overlooked in modern times, that the most robust and enduring connections are not always the most overtly apparent or forceful. Indeed, the most durable outcomes frequently arise from collaborating with natural forces rather than striving to conquer them, and from investing the necessary time to deeply comprehend materials rather than hastily applying superficial, temporary fixes. In a contemporary world increasingly characterized by ephemeral and transient structures, the Parthenon stands as an eternal reminder that some creations are inherently worth building to last for eternity. While master craftsmen like Callicrates dedicated their lives to erecting architectural marvels that would resonate through the centuries, in the very shadows cast by those same gleaming marble columns, there existed women whose contributions and voices were almost entirely erased by the annals of history. Almost, but not quite. This narrative now shifts to explore the compelling ways in which Athenian women, despite residing within a patriarchal society that officially mandated their silence, discovered ingenious avenues to make their voices heard, and how their often unseen influence subtly shaped the very fabric of the city in ways that would only become fully discernible generations later. Consider Xanthippe, whose name is perhaps most widely recognized as the spouse of the renowned philosopher Socrates, yet she was undeniably a figure of far greater substance than a mere historical footnote to her famous husband. On a typical Athenian morning, while Socrates ambled through the bustling agora, engaging in his characteristic practice of posing unsettling questions that frequently perturbed the city's politicians, Xanthippe meticulously managed a complex household. This domestic sphere encompassed not only her immediate family members, but also enslaved persons, numerous apprentices, and a continuous procession of distinguished visitors who arrived to engage in intellectual discourse with Socrates. Historical accounts frequently portray Xanthippe as possessing a sharp tongue and a challenging disposition. However, it is crucial to ponder what the descriptor difficult might have truly signified for a woman living in the confines of ancient Athens. She adeptly presided over an intricate household, often contending with an irregular and unpredictable income. Philosophers, after all, were not known for earning consistent wages, all while skillfully navigating the intricate social dynamics of men who invariably perceived themselves as the most intellectually superior individuals in any given room. If she appeared to exhibit impatience with elaborate intellectual posturing, it is plausible that such a demeanor stemmed from her ceaseless engagement with the practical, daily realities of domestic management, realities that her husband's intellectual admirers often preferred to conveniently disregard. Xanthippe, like all women of her era, was legally precluded from direct participation in Athenian democracy. Women were denied the right to vote, to hold public office, and even to own property in their own names. Nevertheless, they wielded a significant, albeit indirect, influence over the men who possessed these societal privileges. And influence them they did, though rarely in ways that generated clear, explicit historical documentation. It is noteworthy that when Socrates meticulously developed his celebrated method of incisive questioning designed to challenge people's fundamental assumptions, he was, in essence, practicing on a daily basis with a woman who had, for many years, been systematically questioning his own assumptions regarding the practicalities of domestic life. Let us now consider Aspasia, arguably the most celebrated woman in classical Athens, though her prominence was undeniably achieved at a considerable personal cost. She occupied the unique and often ambiguous social role of a hetaira, or courtesan, which afforded her a peculiar standing within Athenian society. In stark contrast to citizen wives, who were largely expected to maintain a discreet and almost invisible presence, heterae enjoyed certain freedoms. They could legally own property, actively conduct business, and perhaps most significantly, engage in sophisticated intellectual conversation with prominent and influential men. Aspasia eventually became the esteemed companion of Pericles, widely regarded as the preeminent Athenian statesman of his epoch. Numerous historical sources indicate that she exerted considerable influence over his political policies, particularly those pertaining to citizenship and the rights of women. Some ancient chroniclers even posited that she contributed to the composition of his renowned speeches, although these claims were often presented as scandalous gossip rather than acknowledged, admirable collaboration. The very notion that a woman might contribute intellectually to the sphere of political rhetoric was to Athenian men simultaneously captivating and profoundly unsettling. However, Aspasia's profound influence transcended the confines of her personal relationship with Pericles. She presided over what was, in essence, an intellectual salon, a vibrant gathering place where the leading minds of Athens could convene to engage in spirited discussions on philosophy, politics, and literature. Young men, many of whom were destined to become Athens' future leaders, regularly attended these illuminating assemblies, gaining invaluable knowledge not merely from their male peers, but also, crucially, from a woman who possessed an extraordinarily sophisticated understanding of politics, rhetoric, and the intricacies of human nature. The official, conventionally accepted narrative of ancient Athens predominantly centers on the activities of male citizens debating vigorously in the agora and casting their votes in the assembly. The lesser-known, unofficial story, however, encompasses the lives of women like Lysistrata, not merely the fictional character immortalized in Aristophanes' comedic play, but rather the real women who served as the inspiration for that iconic figure. These were ordinary Athenian wives and mothers who, despite being entirely devoid of official political power, ingeniously devised and implemented strategies to influence public policy and shape the destiny of their city. During the protracted and arduous Peloponnesian War, when the venerable city-state of Athens found itself grappling with the overwhelming financial expenditures and the tragic human toll exacted by the prolonged military engagement, the women of Athens began to forge intricate, unofficial channels of communication and influence. While they possessed no direct authority to unilaterally halt the hostilities, their collective actions made it increasingly difficult for their husbands and sons, who held the reins of political power, to overlook the profound human cost exacted by their strategic and political decisions. They assiduously disseminated crucial intelligence regarding battlefield casualties, meticulously organized vital support systems for the burgeoning number of war widows, and cultivated a pervasive social climate that eventually contributed significantly to the initiation of peace negotiations. These vital networks, largely invisible to the official chroniclers and record-keepers of the era, operated through the intricate tapestry of personal relationships that were nonetheless absolutely indispensable to the smooth functioning of daily Athenian existence. Women regularly converged at the communal wells, where they gathered pristine water for their households, at the bustling marketplaces where essential provisions were acquired, and at the sacred religious festivals where they participated both as revered priestesses and devout attendees. Within these seemingly ordinary yet pivotal spaces, they exchanged vital information, collaboratively coordinated responses to pressing community problems, and crucially, preserved the very social cohesion that prevented Athens from unraveling during tumultuous periods of intense political upheaval. Religious life, perhaps more than any other societal sphere, offered Athenian women their most legitimate and recognized path to public influence. A multitude of crucial religious offices and ceremonial roles were exclusively reserved for women, and the spiritual authority inherent in these positions naturally translated into a tangible social standing that men found exceedingly difficult to entirely disregard. The Pythia, the revered priestess who served as the divine conduit for Apollo's oracles at Delphi, stood as one of the most formidable and respected figures across the entire Hellenic world. When she spoke, monarchs and military commanders alike listened with rapt attention, for her pronouncements were understood to emanate directly from the Olympian deities themselves. Yet, even within less prominent religious capacities, women discovered ample opportunities to demonstrate leadership and sway community decisions. Consider, for instance, a priestess tasked with orchestrating a religious festival. Such an undertaking was, in essence, the meticulous planning and execution of a substantial civic occasion. Her responsibilities encompassed coordinating diverse resources, expertly managing complex logistical arrangements, and uniting the populace for a shared celebration. These organizational aptitudes were strikingly identical to those intrinsically required for effective political governance, even though society consistently failed to formally recognize them as such. The women who served as midwives occupied another position of considerable, if often unofficial, influence within Athenian society. Childbirth was a perilous endeavor in ancient Athens, and the expertise of a proficient midwife could literally mean the difference between life and death for both the expectant mother and her infant. These women accumulated an extensive and profound body of knowledge, not solely pertaining to the physical birthing process itself, but also encompassing the intricate dynamics of families, the complex tapestry of community relationships, and the concealed personal struggles that subtly shaped public conduct. Midwives were, in fact, consulted about far more than merely pregnancy and childbirth. They served as trusted confidants offering sagacious counsel for marriage difficulties, astute advisors on the nuances of child-rearing practices, and adept informal mediators in familial disputes. Their intimate awareness of which households were flourishing and which were contending with hardships provided them with invaluable insights into the overall well-being and health of the community, often surpassing the understanding possessed by male politicians. While they couldn't cast votes in the assembly, their unique perspectives profoundly influenced the private dialogues that in turn subtly guided public policy decisions. The official educational system in Athens formally excluded women from traditional schooling. However, learning is not solely confined to institutional settings. Mothers diligently instructed their daughters not merely in essential domestic skills, but also imparted foundational literacy, fundamental numeracy, and crucial cultural knowledge. Furthermore, some affluent families, recognizing the value of intellectual development, engaged private tutors for their daughters, mirroring the educational provisions made for their sons. These well-schooled women subsequently assumed roles as informal educators, disseminating knowledge and fostering intellectual growth among other women within their respective communities. Evidence suggests that, notwithstanding their official exclusion from formal academic institutions and universities, a notable number of Athenian women attained remarkably high levels of education. They engaged with classical literature, comprehended complex philosophical concepts, and meticulously followed political developments with a sophisticated awareness. This accumulated knowledge was then circulated through intricate networks of friendship and familial ties, effectively establishing an alternative educational apparatus that functioned robustly in parallel to the dominant, male-centric official institutions. Perhaps the most profoundly impactful contribution Athenian women made to their society stemmed from their fundamental and indispensable role in raising children. The young males who were destined to become Athens' future citizens, influential politicians, and profound philosophical thinkers, spent their crucial early years predominantly in the care and company of women, including their mothers, sisters, female enslaved individuals, and nurses. These women were instrumental in molding nascent intellects during the most impressionable and formative phase of human development. A woman who meticulously raised her sons to value and respect different perspectives, to practice attentive listening before articulating their own thoughts, and to carefully consider the human repercussions of political decisions, was directly and profoundly shaping the character of the subsequent generation of Athenian leadership. Indeed, the celebrated Athenian dedication to rational discourse and robust democratic deliberation may owe as much, if not more, to the pervasive child-rearing practices of its women as it does to the formal political structures and institutions established by men. The archaeological record provides invaluable hints about women's lives that conventional written historical sources often ignore or overlook. Personal artifacts discovered in Athenian residences strongly indicate that women were actively engaged in various forms of economic production, including intricate weaving, decorative pottery work, and meticulous food processing, all of which contributed significantly to household earnings. They were not merely passive consumers of goods purchased by male heads of household. Rather, they were skilled producers whose labor and talents generated tangible wealth for their families. Some women, it appears, even managed modest enterprises directly from their homes, marketing items such as finely woven textiles, prepared foodstuffs, or artisanal craft items in local markets. While legal constraints prevented them from owning property in their own names, they undeniably influenced how family assets were utilized and managed. A woman whose proficiency in weaving or culinary arts yielded substantial income would have commanded considerable influence in household decisions, irrespective of any official legal limitations on her authority. The voices of Athenian women were assuredly not silenced. They were simply channeled through distinct and often unofficial outlets compared to men's voices. They spoke through their profound influence on children, through their recognized religious authority, through their significant economic contributions, and through the indispensable informal networks that actually made daily life possible. Their words did not echo within the assembly halls or endure in formal written speeches, but rather profoundly shaped the intimate dialogues occurring within homes, beside communal wells, amidst bustling market stalls, and around cooking fires. These localized conversations, the narrative continues, were the true catalysts that molded public sentiment, swayed private choices, and incrementally transformed how Athens thought about itself. The democratic system we often recall as purely male was, in fact, profoundly influenced by women whose impact was formidable precisely because it was unofficial, deeply personal, and ultimately impossible to disregard. The object was deceptively simple: a bronze vessel filled with water, its rim elegantly adorned with 8 meticulously crafted bronze dragons. Each dragon, the description continues, delicately clutched a bronze ball in its mouth, positioned directly above a corresponding bronze toad with its jaws agape, poised to intercept any falling sphere. Adults traversing the bustling agora might casually glance at it and assume it was merely an elaborate plaything, something designed to occupy the restless hands of children while their parents engaged in commercial transactions. Yet this particular toy held a deeper significance. It belonged to Zhang Heng, a distinguished Chinese scholar who had journeyed to Athens as part of a diplomatic delegation. He had transported the intricate apparatus not as a form of mere amusement, but as a sophisticated demonstration of advanced Chinese engineering prowess, though he strategically termed it a dragon jar, to render it less daunting to a populace potentially wary of foreign inventions. In this same Athens, where women skillfully forged their voices through unconventional avenues and master craftsmen erected temples destined to endure for millennia, children innocently engaged with toys that adults perceived as merely entertainment. Until, that is, one particular toy revealed profound secrets concerning the prediction of impending natural catastrophes, insights that would remain beyond the full comprehension of modern scientific understanding for another 2,000 years. Zhang Heng earnestly explained to anyone who would listen that the device possessed the remarkable capability to detect subtle earth tremors, vibrations imperceptible to human sensation, which invariably traveled through the ground ahead of larger earthquakes. The bronze balls were so exquisitely counterbalanced that the most minuscule ground disturbance would cause one to dislodge and fall, thereby precisely indicating the direction from which seismic waves were approaching. Most Athenian adults, however, found this scientific explanation considerably difficult to believe. Earthquakes, they firmly knew, were caused by Poseidon's divine anger, not by movements within the earth itself. The notion that tiny mechanical vibrations could somehow predict the sea god's wrath seemed to them to conflate disparate categories: mechanical contraptions with divine behavior, and exotic foreign sagacity with ingrained local religious conviction, in a manner they found profoundly unsettling and illogical. 7-year-old Alexios, the son of a pottery merchant, was captivated by the intricate bronze dragons and their meticulously balanced spheres. He had been observing the device for several days, holding out hope of witnessing one of the dragons release its ball into a waiting toad's mouth. But nothing had yet transpired. The balls sat perfectly still, as unmoving as the dragons themselves. But Alexios, with the unburdened and open curiosity characteristic of childhood, spent countless hours observing the dragon jar and posing insightful questions to Zhang Heng that his more sophisticated elders were seemingly too reserved or perhaps too dismissive to ask. How do the dragons know which direction to drop their balls? What makes the balls balanced so carefully that they respond to movements people can't feel? Why do earthquakes send signals ahead of themselves? Through these persistent observations and experiments, Alexios learned a profound truth. The earth was in a perpetual state of subtle motion, movements that generally eluded human perception. This encompassed not only the overt shifts associated with earthquakes, but also minute, incessant vibrations originating from distant meteorological phenomena, the rhythmic surge of ocean waves, and even the collective footsteps of numerous individuals walking together. The dragon jar, he came to understand, was ingeniously engineered to filter out these commonplace, routine vibrations and respond exclusively to the specific category of ground movement that reliably heralded the approach of an earthquake. Zhang Heng, experiencing a profound sense of gratification upon encountering an individual genuinely keen on comprehending his groundbreaking invention, rather than merely critiquing it, embarked on the task of elucidating the intricate nature of vibrations to Alexios. Together, they delved into experimental explorations, using rudimentary manifestations of the same core principle. Simple bowls of water would betray subtle ripples when the ground underwent imperceptible tremors. Delicately balanced stones would inevitably topple at the slightest terrestrial undulation, and various suspended objects would exhibit a discernible sway in direct response to movements far too minute for ordinary human perception. The apparatus itself was a marvel of elegant engineering, distinguished by its inherent simplicity. At the very heart of the bronze vessel resided a precisely calibrated pendulum, a substantial, weighty bronze mass meticulously suspended at its absolute center. When seismic waves propagated through the Earth's crust, their passage would impart a gentle oscillation to this pendulum, causing it to swing ever so slightly in the precise trajectory of the incoming waves. This delicate yet decisive motion, in turn, would activate an intricate internal mechanism, culminating in the corresponding dragon effigy releasing its spherical projectile. For an extended period of several weeks, the enigmatic dragon jar remained steadfastly inert within the bustling agora, an object of hopeful anticipation for young Alexios, yet largely dismissed by the adult populace as nothing more than an exotic, foreign superstition. Then, one tranquil afternoon, during the customary period when most citizens indulged in their midday respite, an unexpected event transpired. One of the dragons abruptly relinquished its bronze orb. The metallic sphere descended with a distinct, resonant chime, settling perfectly into the waiting mouth of the bronze toad below, its clear ringing reverberating across the almost deserted marketplace. Alexios, his heart pounding with unbridled exhilaration, immediately sprinted to locate Zhang Heng. The dragon positioned towards the northeast had released its sphere, a signal which, according to Zhang Heng's prior detailed explanation, unequivocally indicated that earthquake tremors were originating from that precise direction. Curiously, however, no seismic event had manifested, at least none that had been perceived or felt by anyone residing within Athens itself. The elder citizens who eventually learned of the peculiar incident were understandably skeptical, positing that perhaps the ball had merely dislodged itself after an extended period of dormancy within the dragon's maw. Yet, a mere 2 days subsequent to this occurrence, a messenger arrived from a community situated approximately 50 miles to the northeast of Athens, bearing unsettling tidings. A substantial earthquake had indeed afflicted that distant settlement. The timing was chillingly precise. The seismic event had struck on the very afternoon the dragon had dropped its ball. The earthquake had wrought considerable devastation, causing extensive damage to numerous structures, inflicting injuries upon several individuals, and severely disrupting the local water provision system. By the time this crucial information reached Athens through the conventional channels of communication, the ingenious dragon jar had already provided an advance indication of both the calamitous event and its specific geographical origin. This astonishing correlation, if indeed it could be attributed to mere chance, captivated public attention in a manner that Zhang Heng's earlier theoretical expositions had utterly failed to achieve. Abruptly, the very adults who had previously relegated the device to the status of a mere curious novelty began to observe it with a newfound, intense interest. This seemingly innocuous toy had successfully detected a significant seismic disturbance from a remarkable distance of 50 miles, thereby offering a crucial early warning that possessed the profound potential to safeguard both human lives and valuable property. Nevertheless, truly comprehending the operational mechanics of the device necessitated a radical reorientation of how most Greeks traditionally conceived of the earth. Instead of perceiving earthquakes as abrupt manifestations of divine displeasure or celestial wrath, one was compelled to envision the earth as an immense, intricately interconnected geological system, where disturbances originating in one locale transmitted discernible signals to far-flung regions. Over the ensuing months, the dragon jar repeatedly affirmed its remarkable efficacy. It accurately pinpointed seismic events in territories too remote for Athenians to experience directly, consistently furnishing advanced notice that empowered communities to brace themselves for potential aftershocks or other consequential secondary impacts. Gradually, even the most obdurate skeptics among the adult population conceded that the device undeniably functioned, though a lingering uncertainty persisted regarding the precise mechanics of its operation or the underlying scientific principles. As his diplomatic assignment drew to a close, Zhang Heng made the deliberate decision to leave the dragon jar in Athens, partly as a magnanimous gesture of gratitude to a city that had extended him such gracious hospitality, and partly because Alexios had emerged as its most ardent and dedicated pupil. Zhang Heng meticulously instructed the boy on the proper upkeep of the intricate device, the nuanced interpretation of its subtle signals, and, most crucially, the effective communication of its warnings in a manner that would command serious attention from the populace. Alexios, with the inherent receptiveness of youth to novel concepts, assimilated this complex understanding with far greater ease than many adults. He began to perceive the very ground beneath Athens not as an unyielding, static foundation, but rather as an integral component of a dynamic, living system, perpetually shifting, subtly breathing, and responsively reacting to forces both proximate and distant. This profound realization would inexorably shape his entire philosophical approach to the world as he progressed into adulthood. Alexios assumed the mantle of the unofficial guardian of the dragon jar, diligently inspecting it on a daily basis, meticulously cleaning its delicate mechanisms, and promptly reporting to city officials whenever a dragon released its ball. He ingeniously established a network of swift messengers who could rapidly corroborate whether predicted earthquakes had indeed transpired in the indicated directions. Consequently, his regular earthquake reports became an anticipated and integral feature of Athenian civic life. This heightened attentiveness to subtle environmental cues progressively reshaped how other Athenians conceptualized natural phenomena. Instead of viewing meteorological patterns, seismic activity, and seasonal transformations as arbitrary expressions of divine will, they began to discern recurring patterns that were amenable to observation, prediction, and proactive preparation. The seemingly simple child's toy had, in essence, introduced an entirely new paradigm for understanding the intrinsic relationship between human civilization and the natural world. As he matured, Alexios's comprehension deepened, and he began to grasp the broader ramifications of what the dragon jar unequivocally demonstrated. If minuscule vibrations possessed the capacity to foretell earthquakes, what other imperceptible signals might potentially reveal vital intelligence about the world around them? He subsequently broadened his observational scope, meticulously noting animal behavior preceding inclement weather, identifying distinct patterns in wind direction that might presage atmospheric shifts, and detecting subtle variations in water levels that could signify impending floods. The demonstrable triumph of the dragon jar also significantly influenced Athenian attitudes towards foreign knowledge. Zhang Heng's sophisticated device had performed precisely as he had asserted it would, notwithstanding its foundation in concepts that initially appeared fundamentally incongruous with the prevailing Greek understanding of earthquakes. This irrefutable success fostered a greater openness to assimilating knowledge from other cultures, particularly in domains where tangible, practical outcomes could be readily measured and verified. Many years later, when Alexios had attained the esteemed status of a respected adult, and the dragon jar had indisputably averted numerous earthquake-related catastrophes, philosophers began to integrate its invaluable lessons into their profound deliberations on the nature of knowledge and the power of observation. If a mere bronze contraption could reliably detect events unfolding 50 miles away, what might diligent human observation potentially unveil about other concealed patterns woven into the fabric of the world? The unassuming toy that had initially been perceived as mere diversionary entertainment evolved into an indispensable instrument that preserved countless lives. Yet, beyond its utilitarian function, it transmuted into a profound educator, significantly expanding human comprehension of the natural world's intricate workings. It powerfully demonstrated that meticulous observation coupled with precise measurement possessed the capacity to unearth hidden interconnections between geographically distant events, an epoch-making insight that would ultimately form one of the foundational pillars of modern scientific thought. In his advanced years, Alexios would occasionally take his seat beside the venerable dragon jar in the agora, observing the wide-eyed children as they examined it with the very same captivated fascination he had experienced decades earlier. He would recount vivid tales of Zhang Heng and the momentous first instance a dragon released its ball, of the crucial lesson in trusting empirical instruments over ingrained assumptions, and of the profound discovery that the earth itself harbored unexpected wisdom awaiting human perception. And every so often, when one of the inquisitive children articulated precisely the right question, he would discern that nascent spark of curiosity, that transformative moment that elevates a simple child's plaything into a veritable window onto the concealed mechanisms of the world. The resolution, much like the majority of truly profound answers, proves considerably more compelling than the initial inquiry. Poseidon's recurrent defeats were not attributable to any inherent weakness, foolishness, or stroke of ill fortune. Rather, his losses stemmed from his consistent adherence to a particular methodology for problem-solving, an approach which, while undeniably impressive in its grandeur, frequently failed to align with the practical, quotidian necessities of human existence. As our gentle expedition through these venerable ancient narratives draws to its conclusion, we revisit a perplexing question that may have lingered in your thoughts since our very first chronicle. Given Poseidon's immense power, his dominion over all the oceans, his capacity to shake the very foundations of the earth, his command over tumultuous storms, why did he consistently suffer defeat at the hands of other deities in contests that seemingly played directly to his formidable strengths? Reflect upon that pivotal morning on the Athenian hilltop, where Poseidon and Athena contended for the esteemed patronage of the nascent city. Poseidon's offering, the gushing salt spring, was undeniably magnificent in its immediate impact. It served as a potent demonstration of his raw power, yielded instantaneous results, and unequivocally proved his ability to manifest extraordinary phenomena at will. In terms of sheer, unadulterated impressiveness, it conspicuously outshone Athena's quietly flourishing olive tree. This discernible pattern reiterated itself throughout the annals of Greek mythology. Poseidon habitually confronted challenges with overwhelming force, decisive speed, and dramatic flair. Other divinities, however, would approach identical dilemmas with cultivated patience, profound wisdom, or astute strategic foresight. And time and again, the more measured, patient approach consistently proved more efficacious than the overtly powerful one. Not because patience inherently possessed a superior quality, but precisely because it was better attuned and suited to the specific exigencies of the challenges at hand. However, the Athenians' ultimate selection was not predicated solely on superficial impressiveness. Their decision was fundamentally guided by considerations of practicality, long-term sustainability, and enduring benefit. Poseidon's spring was undeniably spectacular and offered immediate gratification. Athena's olive tree, conversely, was supremely utilitarian and embodied patient growth. This pivotal contest illuminated a crucial insight into the qualities that define an effective leader. Not merely the capacity to orchestrate breathtaking spectacles, but rather the sagacity to furnish what people genuinely require and can effectively utilize in their daily lives. Consider Poseidon's intrinsic personality as it was understood by the ancients. He was characterized by fervent passion, an impetuous temper, a generous disposition with his immense power, and an ingrained expectation of immediate outcomes. These attributes are not inherently negative. Passion can ignite monumental achievements. Swift action can resolve pressing crises, and the judicious, generous application of power can accomplish feats that meticulous planning alone might never achieve. Yet, these very qualities also rendered him predictably susceptible in ways that his astute opponents could readily exploit. During the ancient contest for patronage over Athens, Athena exhibited a profound understanding of her formidable uncle, Poseidon. She judiciously refrained from attempting to equal his sheer demonstration of brute force and overwhelming might. Instead, the goddess presented a gift that addressed an entirely different spectrum of human necessities. Her olive tree, while perhaps not instantly captivating or dramatically impressive upon its initial appearance, promised continuous, practical utility for countless generations. Athena's victory was not predicated on superior strength compared to Poseidon's monumental power, but rather on her offering's profound relevance to the enduring, everyday requirements of humanity. This pivotal event illuminates a crucial insight regarding the very nature of power itself. Unbridled raw power undoubtedly commands awe and possesses the capacity to achieve extraordinarily dramatic feats with astonishing speed. However, such immense power is inherently costly to sustain and notoriously challenging to wield with precision. Poseidon, for instance, could effortlessly conjure freshwater springs, unleash devastating earthquakes, or summon tempestuous storms. Yet these formidable abilities were invariably all-or-nothing propositions. He lacked the delicate control to instigate merely a minor tremor or a precisely localized squall. His interventions were always on a grand, indiscriminate scale. In stark contrast, other divine beings had mastered the art of applying their formidable capabilities with far greater efficiency and discernment. Athena, for example, possessed the subtle ability to inspire profound wisdom within specific individuals at opportune moments, without needing to orchestrate the wholesale transformation of entire civilizations. Apollo could unerringly guide individual arrows to their mark, eschewing the necessity of reconfiguring the celestial alignments of the stars. Similarly, Artemis could extend her protective aegis over particular hunters, rather than rendering all wild creatures universally docile and compliant. Poseidon's fundamental approach to confronting challenges was distinctively different, characterized by an unwavering belief in the application of maximum force with decisive intent. His philosophy was to utterly overwhelm a problem with such immense power that it simply ceased to exist as an obstacle. This strategy proved remarkably effective for certain categories of difficulties, such as carving out clear shipping lanes through treacherous waters or vanquishing adversaries in direct head-on combat. Yet, it consistently proved inadequate and even counterproductive when faced with challenges demanding subtlety, enduring patience, or far-sighted, long-term strategic deliberation. The human observers, witnessing these divine contests unfold, gradually began to discern the critical distinction between mere power and genuine effectiveness. They progressively came to appreciate that the most outwardly impressive or spectacular solution was not always the most genuinely useful one. Furthermore, they understood that lasting success often emerged from approaches that initially appeared modest or unassuming, but which ultimately demonstrated their profound and enduring value over the passage of time. This accumulated wisdom significantly influenced the ancient Greeks' perspectives on their own lives and the decisions they confronted. When grappling with complex problems, they learned to pose a more nuanced question than simply, "What is the strongest possible response?" Instead, their inquiry evolved to, "What is the most appropriate and fitting response?" They cultivated a deep-seated appreciation for solutions that harmonized with natural forces rather than attempting to brutally overpower them. and for leaders who could inspire willing cooperation rather than merely demanding unquestioning obedience. Poseidon's repeated setbacks served as another invaluable lesson. Even the most colossal power possesses inherent limitations. No single individual, whether a god of immense might or a mortal of great influence, can hope to resolve every conceivable problem through sheer force alone. The most powerful person within any collective still benefits immensely from collaborating with others, still needs to meticulously consider long-term ramifications, and still must operate within the natural and social constraints that simply cannot be overcome by brute strength. However, perhaps the most profound reason for Poseidon's persistent losses was his apparent inability to truly internalize the lessons from his defeats. After suffering the loss of Athens to Athena, he demonstrated no discernible modification in his strategic approach for subsequent competitions. He steadfastly continued to rely on magnificent displays of immediate, overwhelming power, seemingly hoping that eventually people would prioritize spectacular showmanship over practical substance. While this unwavering consistency might have lent him a certain honorable steadfastness in some respects, it simultaneously rendered him remarkably predictable in ways that more adaptable and astute opponents could readily exploit. Athena, conversely, exhibited a remarkable capacity for learning from every single encounter. She meticulously observed what strategies proved successful, what failed to achieve its desired outcome, and, crucially, what human beings genuinely valued when they were compelled to live with the tangible consequences of divine gifts. Through this continuous process, she became increasingly adept at accurately assessing complex situations and more skilled at providing precisely what was needed rather than simply what was most outwardly impressive to bestow. Within his rightful domain, the boundless, often turbulent, and utterly unpredictable ocean, Poseidon's direct and forceful approach was, in fact, perfectly suited. At sea, problems frequently demand immediate, powerful, and decisive responses. Storms cannot be reasoned with through eloquent arguments. Treacherous currents cannot be negotiated with diplomatic overtures. And dangerous marine creatures cannot be persuaded to behave reasonably. In these specific, high-stakes situations, Poseidon's unhesitating application of overwhelming force was precisely the kind of intervention that mariners desperately required from their revered patron god. The consistent pattern of Poseidon's numerous defeats thus unveils something profoundly significant about the principles of specialization and context. Every conceivable approach to problem-solving, whether it is founded upon raw power, profound wisdom, innovative creativity, or enduring patience, possesses specific situations where it will excel and others where it will prove utterly inadequate. True success emanates not from possessing the single, best approach universally, but from cultivating the sagacity to understand precisely which approach is optimally suited for any given situation. The diverse narratives shared this evening, ranging from Athena's patiently cultivated olive tree to the ingenious child, earthquake-detecting toy, from the potter's meticulous shaping of clay to the women who discovered and amplified their voices through unconventional, unofficial channels, all vividly underscore this identical fundamental principle. The most genuinely effective solutions are frequently not the most obvious or ostentatious ones, and enduring success typically springs from a deep and nuanced understanding of what a particular situation truly demands, rather than simply applying maximum force and blindly hoping for a favorable outcome. The ancient Greeks inhabited a world where different deities were deemed appropriate for fulfilling distinct needs. One might appropriately direct prayers to Poseidon when embarking on a sea voyage, to Athena when confronted with momentous decisions, to Apollo when seeking artistic inspiration, to Artemis when engaged in the hunt, or to Demeter when planting vital crops. This intricate system was not an indication of confusion or inconsistency. Rather, it represented a sophisticated recognition that diverse challenges inherently necessitate a variety of specialized tools and approaches. Poseidon's many defeats were, in essence, invaluable lessons ingeniously disguised, imparting crucial knowledge to both gods and mortals alike about the fundamental differences between raw power and discerning wisdom, between what merely appears impressive and what is truly effective, and between what looks good in the fleeting moment and what genuinely works well over an extended period. His losses collectively helped everyone comprehend that even the mightiest and most formidable among them could significantly benefit from cultivating patience, engaging in careful observation, and demonstrating a genuine willingness to provide precisely what others genuinely required. As one gently drifts towards slumber tonight, perhaps the soft, rhythmic sound of waves caressing distant shores can be heard. The vast, powerful domain where Poseidon's influence remains as absolutely essential as ever. Yet one might also perceive the quieter, more subtle sounds that truly sculpted ancient Athens. The gentle sizzle of olive oil in bronze pans, the steady rhythmic hum of pottery wheels turning, the murmur of voices sharing innovative ideas around humble tables, and the soft, purposeful footsteps of people who had profoundly learned that the most enduring victories often arise not from overpowering problems, but from understanding them so deeply that one can provide precisely what the moment truly necessitates. Sleep soundly, knowing that both formidable power and profound wisdom hold their indispensable places in this intricate world, and that the mastery of choosing wisely between them is perhaps the most invaluable skill any individual can ever hope to cultivate.